Hello, folks. Welcome to our weekly chat. Thanks for joining me. Boy, it's a hot one out there. If you're watching live, you will probably be, hopefully, inside air conditioning or in the shade. It's what they're saying. I'm hearing a lot of folks saying this is unprecedented weather for September, especially the first week of school. And in fact, it might be 90 degrees when the kids go back to school on Wednesday, and it has some people chatting about how weird this weather is. And I do remember weeks back going back to school where it was hot, but a lot of folks again are talking about how um, using that word that we hear a lot when it comes to history, that is unprecedented. And so that got me thinking about a topic for this week. I actually had another topic in mind, but because of this weather, and I was watching the news this morning, and it got me thinking. And one of the things I like to do is go back and check to see when you hear the word unprecedented to try to figure out whether it really is. So on the news this morning, they were talking about how first of all the temperatures could get up to 90 today and tomorrow, Tuesday and Wednesday. Um, and they were saying that the last time we're probably not going to break a record. The overall record for hottest day in Western New York is 99 degrees. We've apparently never officially gotten over 100 degrees. But also the hottest September day was September 3rd, 1953, when we hit 98 degrees. That the hottest September day we've ever had officially, according to the official count. So, of course, that piqued my interest. So I went back into our local newspaper, the Easter Advertiser, and checked back in 1953 and discovered a very small little article inside the newspaper that you're going to be seeing on social media. I think either today or tomorrow. I have it scheduled to be posted. Um, and it wasn't very long, and actually it came out the week uh, later because that September 3rd landed on a Thursday, and that was the day the newspaper came out. So this story appeared a full week later, and they were talking about how the temperatures had dropped significantly um, since the 10-day heat wave. So 1953, there was a 10-day period of 80s and in this case 90-degree weather, and that on that September 3rd day, where the official temperature, according to the meteorologists, was 98, that it climbed here in East Aurora unofficially to 96. And that's all because I heard it on the news this morning, so I wanted to check it out, see what East Aurorans were doing that day. But what ended up happening is that a cold front came through the following week and dropped the temperatures over 20 degrees in 1 hour. And then a couple days later, the temperatures were at 40 in the 40s. So it went from a high of 96 down to the 40s in a week, and it dropped 20 degrees in just an hour when a cold front came through. Um, does history repeat itself? Well, you often hear that where you hear people say it repeats itself, the past is prologue, and sometimes you hear people say that it doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. That things from the past that happen um, uh, resemble quite a bit history and today. There's a big resemblance between events, and we can often see that. In this case, it seems like history is not just going to rhyme; it is really going to repeat itself. We're expected to be 90 degrees tomorrow for the first day of school. And next week we're supposed to get more seasonable temperatures and actually rain, and they're talking about it dropping quite a bit. So same kind of weather pattern. But what I found most interesting in what got me thinking about history repeating itself, is I didn't realize how closely not only the weather is repeating itself, but in that same issue of the Easter Advertiser. So this article was in the September 10th, 1953 Easter Advertiser. In that same issue, there was a front page article about a trip that the local Boy Scout troop was taking. They were taking a camping trip up to Canada. And they were talking about the Canadian wildfires, and I couldn't believe it. I thought I was reading a newspaper from this last summer. There were Canadian wildfires, and these Boy Scouts from East Aurora were caught in it. And the article talks about how they helped fight the fire. Now they really didn't, you know, they didn't fight the fire directly, but they helped rangers up there and learned about how to make to prevent forest fires, and they helped with the water on smaller fires, and they learned about clearing forest in order to prevent from the fire from spreading. But that article talked quite a bit about the Canadian wildfire in Ontario, the province of Ontario, in 1953. And I don't know if you've thought about this, but over the summer when we were talking about Canadian wildfires, and they're actually still happening, and when that smoke from the Canadian wildfires was coming into the United States, northeast United States, including the Buffalo area, um, we heard on the news reports that this hadn't really happened before, and a lot of us don't remember it happening before. And so, because we haven't had this experience with smoke, we're aware of California wildfires, but we haven't been really aware of Canadian wildfires because it hadn't really impacted us. And it's in another country, and it's north of the border. And if we weren't experiencing smoke, we didn't. It wasn't in our news, to be honest, and it wasn't on our minds. But because the smoke was coming south and into our area, and we were forced to close windows and cancel events because of the Canadian wildfires, all of a sudden Canadian wildfires were a thing. We are aware of them. But in fact, and so for many of us, we might have felt like that this was unprecedented, that this didn't happen before. But in fact, Canadian wildfires happened a lot. And actually, that in 1953, when the Boy Scouts were there, um, and that article, I'll share it since you're such loyal viewers. I'll give you a preview of that. So if you're watching on Facebook, I will put it in the comments, but it will appear on social media later this month. But that got me to thinking, and I did some Google searching about Canadian wildfires, and they've been happening quite a bit. And actually, in the 1950s, were some pretty big ones, pretty big wildfires in Canada. But again, a lot of times we think, whether it's said or not on the news, we hear in our head, or we think that something's unprecedented because we've never experienced it before. But in fact, it actually happened. And that really hit me while I was reading through this one issue of the Easter Advertiser. Had both an article about the heat wave, the 90-degree temperatures in September, and the Canadian wildfires. And I just thought it was kind of interesting that that it was happening 70 years ago this summer, and in some cases 7 years ago this month, this week, the September temperatures. So it's just very interesting to me, the timing of it. So not only the anniversary of these events, but also that they're almost uncannily similar. So history, in fact, is repeating itself. Also, in that very same issue of the Easter Advertiser was a front page article about a local, a Buffalo judge, judge in Buffalo, talking to the Kiwanis Club, and he was speaking about kids, and he especially children and teenagers, and he was especially talking about boys, but that he was claiming that he was seeing more boys getting into trouble in the courts, and he was trying to he was trying to attribute it to, or he did attribute it to, the lack of parenting, and that parents weren't around, and kids were given too much money and too much freedom, and that got them into trouble. But one of the things I found interesting was that there were articles at the time claiming that teenagers were being given more freedom, and the telephone was causing issues. Now, I completely didn't think about this, but in 1953, more and more homes were getting phones, and more payphones were being installed or had been installed around the community, which gave teenagers more freedom. And so a teenager could go out and call home or call their friends, and and they were seeing this as not always a good thing, that the teenagers were able to be out and about more easily because they had the connection of the telephone. And I was thinking, well, that's interesting. That's not a case of history repeating itself, but it might be a case of history rhyming, because I hear that a lot today about teenagers being stuck on their cell phones, and being too connected and too while they're not living in the present. And I would argue it's not just teenagers; it's all of us that do that. But I thought it quite quite interesting that they were talking about in 1953 how the telephone was among the things that were causing problems among youth. At least attributing it to that. And he also, the judge that was talking to the Kiwanis Club in this case, also blamed divorce and how kids were just being given too much money. And that the family was breaking down. So he blamed that too. But a lot of that, there was a chain reaction, a domino effect that was being blamed on it. For youth, more and more youth, at least he was saying this anecdotally, more youth getting into trouble. This goes back to what I was talking about last week where, I was talking about 1941 where we had Mrs. Persons here in East Aurora. If you want to watch that, please do. She was talking about young people in her community, East Aurora, being too spoiled. And she was talking about the Greatest Generation. And then so I found it interesting that just 10 years or 12 years later, actually, in the paper I found another instance where someone was talking about kids getting in trouble and perhaps being too spoiled, having too much money, disposable money, and being connected with the telephone. And so imagine what these folks would think about today. So every generation thinks that about the next generation. In some cases, it might be true, where more and more people are young people are getting into trouble. In the case of 1953, this judge made a pretty good point. He was saying that they had grown up, this group of teenagers, probably, your 16, 17, 18-year-olds, had grown up in World War II, and so they were seeing the results of what was happening during World War II, where we were at war and all the impact of that. And so that he was also talking about that, and radio and television was coming on too, and becoming more popular. A little bit later, but radio was seen as bringing some negative, brought a lot of positive into people's home, but it also brought a lot of negative. So again, history repeats itself, and these were just 3 cases in my research just today where I found that history repeated itself in just one issue of the East Aurora Advertiser. So again, whenever you hear that word unprecedented, and people talk to me about this quite a bit, be very skeptical, because it isn't always unprecedented. Yes, there are some things happening today that probably never have happened before, or happened in the way that they're happening today, politically, all those things we talk about. But truly, things are not unprecedented, 100% unprecedented. And so we just have to dig back. Sometimes it's easier than others. In this case, in one issue of the East Aurora Advertiser, to find that something has happened before. So thanks for joining me again. This week I will be sharing the YouTube channel that I've launched. Some people have said to me that they don't like watching on Facebook, and that it's quite difficult for some folks to watch on Facebook, and that it's harder to search and go back and watch old videos. So I'm putting them on YouTube. And again, thanks for the feedback. Put comments either in the comments if you have an idea. Send me a private message if you want to do that. And I enjoy getting ideas from folks. So feel free to do that. Again, I am the Town and Village Historian, but these videos and the research I do, a lot of it is done separate from my official duties as historian. So this project is not affiliated with my official duties as Town and Village Historian. I do it separate. Again, thanks for joining me, and stay cool out there, and wait for that cold front to come through next week. We'll see you next time. Thanks.